creating responsive learning environments. And the first thing I want to do is just give you a quick flyover of what we're going to study in this chapter. The first part is certainly something you're familiar with, and that is the part of special ed, like students with disabilities, who's at risk, these economic people, linguistic backgrounds, and just who's at risk of school failure. And you've studied this in SPED 100 and other SPED classes, and so this will just kind of confirm it. We'll spend some time, and I'm going to introduce this, but I will spend a lot more time on this later on the IEP process. Today it'll be just a flyover on this lesson. We'll spend some time on delivering the service of special education, and then some time on this movement of, from regular class to special ed back to regular class, just how and where to serve students. And then some factors about least restrictive environment will come into this, and how that plays. And then just some instructional variables like focus on time of learning, high rates of success, those types of things. So kind of a lengthy chapter, probably about 30 pages, and we'll take off, and you can follow along in the textbook. I'll be referring to the textbook a number of times throughout this lecture, flipping back and forth between my PowerPoint and the textbook. And so please stay with me as I do that, and see if I can bring this home. So what about these environments? This comes out of the textbook, that you have a set of beliefs in this field, and that is that that all individuals are capable of learning. And that's quite a statement. That's a throwaway phrase that we often use in this area, but when it comes down to operationalizing that, what does it look like means no matter what the disability or how tough things are, can you get them to learn? Teaching talent to help all students learn according to the potential exists in most schools today. The knowledge gap between what is known about effective teaching and what routinely is practiced in the classroom is enormous. So that's really where the rubber meets the road, that gap between we know what effective teaching looks like, but what are we doing? What service are we delivering? And then the students need a safe, caring, positive learning environment. When we talk about at risk, that's what it comes down to, is are they in an environment they can learn? So who's at risk? Nothing new about this. Students with disabilities, for some reason, are at the top of that list, special education or some kind of early intervention services. And kind of a direct correlation to the low socioeconomic background students, Title I type students, and then students from cultural and linguistically diverse backgrounds. So before we go to the characteristics, I want to just look at the textbook a little bit about this, and this is, I find this fascinating. Here's this about this part here of your textbook about teaching and can everybody learn. But isn't this interesting? This first statement here in this paragraph, these folks here report that 25 to 40% of all students are estimated to have significant academic problems. Now listen to this. 25 to 40% of all students are estimated to have significant academic problems. Can that be? Doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I know there's some issues, but that seems awful high. But it goes on and explains that a little bit. And please read this, because you're going to want to know this from the test. And then we go to this about who's at risk of school failure. And the first was student disabilities. And you know these different disability areas that are here. Okay. And then students with these low socioeconomic backgrounds, in other words, the poor kids. And how do we know, schools identified with poor kids? Often goes with the free and reduced lunch. I taught in a middle school that had 60 to 70% of the kids got free or reduced lunch. That's a low socioeconomic school. Students from impoverished backgrounds are at risk of academic failure. Get this now, particularly in the area of literacy. This is their most likely area to be at risk, is literacy. Data from the National Assessment of Education Progress indicate that 83% of students from poor homes perform below the basic level of proficiency on reading tasks. The latest statistic demonstrates that parents' low level of education is linked to poor academic outcomes. So that's the thing, what causes what there, but often we find the parents in those same homes have low reading skills. So it goes on to this about Title I programs, and you'll want to read this about what Title I is. Okay, and then it talks about these culturally diverse background students. And it doesn't always hold true, because there are some, especially Asian kids, that doesn't fit this at all. We live next to an Asian family, and I'm telling you, three boys, all gifted. Dad is a postdoctorate researcher. This is what I think is interesting. When we ever have this cultural discussion, we always have to put an asterisk and say, except Asian kids. Characteristics of students at risk for school failures. What does that look like? Well, let's go back to our PowerPoint and look at this. So what are these characteristics? Well, cognitive and metacognitive deficits. They're thinking. They're being able to reason and think. That's cognitive. And metacognitive is how they think about their thinking. That's what metacognitive is. And then low academic achievement, poor memory, attention problems and hyperactivity, poor social skills, poor self-concept, poor motivation, debilitating mood states, adaptive behavior deficits, and disruptive behavior. Now, here's what's interesting also. These characteristics can be identified in kindergarten. That for the most part, these are not characteristics that are developed as they go through school. Often, kindergarten teachers, elementary teachers, can identify these characteristics in kids that are going to be at risk. Okay. This is the first thing I want you to put on your wiki site, is just a list of characteristics of students at risk for school failure, so that you'll have it. Stop this now, hit the pause, and get this on your wiki site and start organizing your wiki. Okay, you're back. Before I go to the IEP, I want to go back to the textbook and just show you where this runs through here. The poor memory, attention problems, things like that. But there's one in here I want to dig in a little deeper on that was very interesting, and that's this one of debilitating mood states. Let me just give you this one. A little research on the mood states of students with learning problems exists. However, some research on students with learning problems offers noteworthy findings. This research indicates that students with learning disabilities have higher levels of depression than students without disabilities, and these difficulties may be more common among girls than boys. Also, research indicates that the rates of depression among individuals with intellectual disabilities are significant. In addition, students with learning problems are at increased risk of suicidal thoughts. Okay. Isn't that interesting? Loneliness and social rejection. So that's why the mood states is what really comes into play. That's why we pay attention to that, because they're at a higher risk. of problems in that area. Okay, and so that's just what that is. So let's look at the IEP, because not all these students will qualify for an IEP. Oh, can I just jump back here on disruptive behavior? Again, often very well documented early on disruptive behavior in the learning environment. And I have a whole bunch of theories about this, but time doesn't permit on this. But one of these, and I'll call this one of my veganisms that you'll get throughout the course, is that often these kids have not had the training of self-control that other kids have had. And so becomes their behavior is disrupted because they've learned to navigate the world with disruptive behavior. And so there's no reason that they wouldn't also do it in school. So how about the IEP? Meeting that needs of a diverse group of students is a formidable task for both general and special ed teachers. Primary and elementary teachers are faced with helping youngsters acquire basic skills, develop those independent learning strategies, and explore careers. While teachers more than 100 students daily, secondary teachers are faced with helping adolescents acquire some specific vocational skills. Okay, so how do we do that? What is this IEP thing? And for the most part, you have this. Now I have put this here, this talk from my educational lab. I have posted this on the wiki, and I would like you to stop now and go listen to Jan Kesey talk about teaching every student. Pause the recording now and go do that. Okay, let's look at this parts of this IEP. Okay, what is the IEP? It's instruction that enables the student to work on appropriate tasks or content over time under conditions that motivate. Ooh, there's a big one. And for the most part, this falls on you as the special ed teacher. And one of the things that I'm always amazed at is the ability of especially student teachers to come up with ideas how to motivate. Will be the biggest challenge, especially as students move through the school system. Here's kindergarten, here's grade 12. The need to motivate is so much greater as they get older, and it has to do with history of failure and not being successful. So just keep this in mind as you navigate this field, and many of you are going to be very good at this. Motivating, creating conditions that motivate kids to learn, and that's part of this individualized instruction. Students receive daily instruction tailored to their educational needs, and that's what we challenge you with, is to deliver this instruction that meets their daily needs. And now we're going to ask you to measure that learning on a regular basis and report it. And we've given you all kinds of ways to do that. Now these categories, don't need to spend time. You know these. These are from SPED 100. However, and this is one that's a little bit interesting, and that is the ADD, ADHD, and that, as we know, is served under other health impairments, or Section 504. And the thing that I'll ask you about ADHD or ADD also is this: what special ed services would you provide for them if you if they qualify, if you certify them as needing an IEP? Okay. Again, now, before we go on, this too, I want you to take to your wiki and organize this on your wiki, these categories of special education that qualify for special education. And each time you take this, I want you to credit it to this textbook. And how you do that is I've given you this information just to copy and paste with your information on your wiki, so that you will always be crediting this textbook. Okay. And where I put that is, I believe, under here. Yes, right here. Take this out, just copy and paste this. Anytime you take stuff from the textbook and put that with it. Okay, then you'll have credited the textbook with that information that you've taken. But here's your second one that you're going to put in your wiki. So how about IDEA, these Individuals with Disabilities Act? And again, we hit this pretty hard in SPED 100 of what IDEA is. We talked about 6 principles, but here's those rights. And you remember this non-discriminatory assessments. Okay? In other words, it has to have the parameters of that specific disability, with no single measure being the only criteria of evaluation. And especially when it comes to the mild disabilities. Now, we talk about somebody that's severe and profoundly disabled, or deaf-blind, or those types of things. Some of this isn't quite as critical, but when it comes to these mild disabilities, determining are they disabled or aren't they, that becomes a lot bigger issue. And then right to this FAPE, and from time to time I'll refer to this FAPE, and you just know it's a free, appropriate public education. They're entitled to be on an IEP. But the FAPE, and we'll have lots of acronyms in special ed. You know we love acronyms, but for the most part, a FAPE will come a free, appropriate public education. That even though they're disabled, they have a right to a FAPE, and we do that through the IEP. And they're always placed in that least restricted environment where they can be with kids without disabilities the most, and whatever supplementary aids and services they need. And what's another term for this? Anyone? Anyone? It's called related services. Okay, related services. So the 4 basic things of IDEA. Okay. Now, let's look at this IEP. Must be signed and implemented for each student 3 to 21 with a disability. What? What? I thought it was birth. I thought it was birth to 21. Anyone? Anyone? Okay, from age 0 to 3, it's an individual family plan, FP, individual family plan. Okay, and so from 0 to 3, you don't need a 0-year-old on IEP to work on academics. Okay, at age 3 they transition to an IEP from a family plan, individual family plan. So the legislative intent of this is to serve 3 primary functions. This is the 3 primary functions of the IEP. Okay, so know this. It's a planning tool, it's a communication tool, and it's a progress tool. What are the 3 functions of the IEP? Planning tool, communication tool, progress tool. IEP must state the following: a plop. Okay. Now, before I get carried away here, let me pull up the IEP. A copy of an IEP form. Okay. This is on the wiki site, and I'm just going to take you through it now. But this, no matter what IEP you look at, it's going to have these components and look somewhat like this. For the most part now, our schools are working with online, computerized IEPs. Yet, they have the exact same components. And again, later we're going to write some IEPs and study these in a little more in depth. But right now, I'm just giving you a flyover of what is involved. Okay, so the first thing, this is just our information page. Student name, meeting dates, those types of things. But the first thing it talked about, a component is a PLOP, present level of academic performance. You can stick with this terminology, and that is that it's a PLOP. Okay. And that will be referred to many, many times also. And on this PLOP, it asks you a number of things, and this is how I will teach you to develop a PLOP, is you give information that is based on the evaluation, academic achievement, functional performance, specifically strengths and weaknesses. Get down here, strengths, weaknesses, in the areas that are affected by the student's disability, including transition. Transition's another thing, and some of you are in the transition course. Transition begins at one age, 14. You have to start talking about transition in the IEP to be effective. The student turns 16 is when you have to have it. I think 14 you have to start planning. But then when you get to that age, you have to include transition in the IEP. And then here's some other headings I want you to address on every time you have PLOP, whether it's on a paper one or an electronic one. Parent concerns, and how the student's disability affects their involvement in the progress of the general curriculum. So, for example, you would say, what is it about this disability that prevents them from being successful in their regular classroom? Is it their attention? Is it their poor memory? Is it their disorganization? All of those things. And some of that you'll have from your personal observation. Some you get from parents. Some you get from your classroom teacher. But you would list these things. What are those things that affects their involvement in the progress in the general education curriculum? Why, in other words, what are those things that they need to be in special education for? That would be the PLOP. What does PLOP stand for? Present levels of academic performance. Present level of performance. Okay. PLOP. It's kind of a cool acronym. Another part is an annual and academic and functional goal. Annual and academic functional goal. Let me go find you where that is. That was page 2, and for the most part, again, they all look the same, so that'd be the second part. Page 1 is just an information page. Page 2 is the PLOP, and again, it gives you those same things here. And then page 3 is another. Okay, let me keep going. And here's the first one starting on page 5 is your educational goals and objective benchmarks. And here's where you would write down what your goal is, how you're going to evaluate it, and then the date that you've given updates on it, and then whatever the progress code is, which generally you use one of these down here. Are they making progress, insufficient, those types of things. And then any comments, and here I would put the data that verifies whatever information you're giving here. And then there's, if you have short-term objectives with that, and then any accommodations and those types of things get listed here. All right. And then if you need more, depending how many the students need, you would just put more. It'd still be a page 5 thing, but it would be more pages. What was this? Goals and objectives. What was the first one? PLOP. Goals and objectives. All right, back to this. Next one is special education, and we talked about it, related services and supplementary aids and services, program modifications, and supports for school personnel. Okay, so where do we describe, this is what we call this, where do we describe special education that they get? Tell what levels they're working at, what our goals are, but this is, what do they get? What programming do they get? What should they be delivered to them? What is in it for them now that we say that they are in special ed, or SPED is our acronym? What's in it for them? Let me grab this other one also. An extent to which they will not be with non-disabled children. So that is their anyone, LRE, their least restrictive environment. So we're going to look at what services do they get and how much will they be away from regular kids. Let's go back to the form. Okay, here is that term, related services to be provided. And related services is what services will they need to help them access the curriculum and be successful in the curriculum. And it gives you a number of things. Occupational therapy, physical therapy, psychological services, counseling services, social work services, audiological services, rec therapy, school nurse and health, speech language, transportation, mobility, medical services, interpreting. Let me just go to the textbook once here and just see what they have to say about related services. This again is going through the parts of the IEP here. Here's the current level of academic performances. Right out of your textbook, academic functioning goals. And then here's the related services, but what are those services? I thought there was a part in here. Let me jump up on here a little bit. Oh, here it takes you through the annual goals, levels of performance. I want to see the... Here's a description of the services in your textbook. Okay. Dates of service, evaluations. Okay. Statement of specific services and materials provided for the student includes who teaches the student, what content is included in the instructional program, and what materials are used. Also, because IDEA requires that the student be educated in the least restrictive environment, the extent of the student's participation in the GEN program must be established. For example, the plan may state that the student functions in the general education classroom for all but an hour of the day. The role of the general education teacher then is noted. The child will sit in the front of the general classroom. Will be individualized spelling tapes developed jointly by the educational teachers. Whatever that is, you spell that out. What does that look like on the IEP? It looks like this, where you make this determination. And again, at a later time I'll show you how we make this determination. This is only for younger ones, okay, from ages 3 to 5. Now if that's not you, here's always my suggestion. If that's not you, my suggestion is always that you take this out, that you don't need this. And it gives you a little more room to work on other things here. But if you electronically, you will calculate this. And this is a math problem, a math calculation to determine which texts you're going to check here. They have to be, with regular students, 40 to 79% of the time to be considered resource. For the most part, 75% of our students with mild disabilities will be this one, will be the general education. Okay. 75% of the students approximately. And what I would do is list that math out here. And here you describe service by service. And if you're on an online program, you would grab this and just what we were talking about in the text. First of all, what is that service? How much is big? How much is a big part of it? So when we talk about how much, is it 1 hour a day? Or 15 minutes a day? Etc. Oh, you want this gets a little interesting? What if they're at Children's Care Hospital and school? then it's 100% of the time. What if they leave and go to another school for a half a day? All that comes into play in amount of service. And same here. Then you say where. And if it goes to Children's Care Hospital School, that goes here. What if they leave and they go to the resource room? Then you would write here the resource room. Or on the online programs, they have a drop box, a click box, where you can enter. Okay. And then down here, if they're not considered with the regular students, then you say, well, what can they participate with? Can they be like in the art class with non-disabled? And then you would mark these that they could do with non-disabled students. Then the last thing you do on this page, and you do this whether you do it online or on the paper, you have to do a justification for that placement. An explanation of the extent, if any, to which the student will not be with non-disabled in regular classes. Please use accept, reject format. Okay. And so, and it also has a little reminder here. The team, who's the team? The IEP team must address the potential harmful effects of special education placement. So, if we said they were in the home hospital, what's the potential harmful effects of that? All the way up if we say that they're in the general education classroom with modifications, what's the potential harmful effects of that? Well, one potential harmful effect of being in the general education classroom with modifications is they may not be successful. That may not be enough special education for them. What is the potential harmful effects if they're in the hospital? Other than they're obviously quite ill, but the potential harmful effect is they're not with non-disabled peers. And so and again, we're going to hit this harder a little bit later, but here's that flyover. This is the thing that describes the page that describes their program, their services, where you literally spell out exactly what it is and what they're going to do. Okay. Now they're here that just out of the textbook, it wants to give you an idea of what changed in the 2004 reauthorization. Now, be prepared for this because, let me see if I got this right. In this reauthorization, the reauthorization happens, this will be interesting, and you will certainly want to know this, every 7 years. Okay, mathematicians, when will we reauthorize IDEA again? (2011). Here's the part we're not telling you. You realize who reauthorizes IDEA? What program is IDEA? Well, the program is the federal government. And now, how fast does federal government move? Right, so if we reauthorize like we did in 4, it wasn't until 2007 to 2008 that we got what we call the regs, the regulations. So here's what I'm going to guess. We're going to reauthorize in 2011 again, and like these are the regulations that came out of 2004, and we will get the ones from 2011 about 2014 or 15. But every 7 years we reauthorize and move forward. So We have to talk about, they said on each page you talk about individual accommodations. You talk about the reasons a child cannot participate in the regular assessments, the projected date for beginning of services, the frequency, location, and duration of services, and that was on the page I just showed you, and post-secondary goals. And this again has to do with transition. And we're not going to do a lot with transition in this course, but I will say that word a number of times because you can't talk about IEPs and this entire instructional process without talking about its effects on transition at age 16. Okay, let me just flip back. Again, I know you love this. So here's where you would talk about accommodations and stuff would be back on this page. What accommodations are needed. All right. And again, we talked about here, what are those services? That's on this page. Transitions, and there's transition page in there. Oh, and the services of it. That's what I'm forgetting. Here is the dates of services. Often are on this very front page. You're putting those in as you open this up. And it's here. Dates of service begin, the annual review date. Okay. And there's a number of pages in here like there is on any IEP that talks about, it talks about this, the assessment part of it. Can they have assessments with their peers? What kind of assessments do they take? Okay. Then here is this transition page. Starting page 4 is transition. Okay. Another day. Let's move on with this. A family service plan. This is the ones that are from 0 to 3. Birth to 3. Know this number. It's on the test. What is 99,457? It is the family service plan. Birth through age 2. Well, I said 3, but it's before they go on to the IEP. Okay. And for the most part, the IFSP is for the families, because you're dealing with families that are raising a disabled child. And for the most part, this is not children with mild disabilities. These are children with much more severe disabilities. Because for the most part, so the mild disabilities are not diagnosed till they're in school. And so these are ones that come deafblind, mentally retarded, any kind of severe disability. This often kicks in there. How does this happen? Anyone? I want to go to the textbook and just see what it talks about in this, about that IFSP. This again is just explaining it. Least restrictive environment, things we talked about. Well, for the most part, the referrals for IFSPs, I'll stop doing this before I tell you this. For the most part, the referrals for IFSP upon the birth of a child with a disability can be from the hospital or from a social worker or something like that. So pending a birth or even at birth, a child's found to have a severe disability, often that referral, that hospital immediately start working with a social worker who will get in touch with school personnel to work with the families. Pray to God you never have to know anything about this, but that's how that was set up, that there was this huge gap of services of these families that were trying to deal with children with severe disabilities. And so that was the onset of that. So what are the components of the IEP? Well, the levels of performance, that PLOP we talked about. They're curriculum-based things. The annual goals, I showed you that page. Short-term objectives, which are right on that goal page. Description of the services. Took you through that page where we laid it all out. And that. So here, I want you to take this on your wiki site and credit again these components of the IEP. Stop this now and take this to your wiki site and organize this with the other information that you've taken, and then come back. Okay, next, who is at these IEP meetings? The law specifies who must participate in the IEP meetings. And they are, first of all, this representative of the school who is qualified to provide or supervise special education, other than the child's teacher. Sometimes this is the principal, or a SPED director, or superintendent, or anybody that is qualified to provide or supervise. So this isn't the regular teacher, it could be the SPED teacher. But for the most part, at this IEP meeting, you would like to have someone other than that. You would like to have what we call a school representative. Okay, so maybe in short you would say a school representative. That's one. Two, the student's teacher, the regular ed and special education teacher. So you could almost make that two of them. Okay. So we could make this 2 and 3, and this one could be 4. And then one or both parents. A must, especially for the first IEP. You need to have one or both. And the student when appropriate. When is it appropriate? Anyone? 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 Yes. Certainly at age 16, but certainly before. I taught in the middle school, and I always invited the student. And how did I do that? I sent them an invitation and put their name on the IEP just like I did the parents. Now, did they come? Not very often. See, remember, at-risk kids in a low-income school, I taught in a low-income school, at-risk kids in a low-income school are not very interested at all in staying after school for a IEP meeting with their parents. When I worked in the jobs program, high school students, more of those participated in transition. For one thing, we insisted that they come. Didn't mean they have to, but we insisted. In middle school, not very often, but I always would personally hand them a note and say, you were invited. So, school representative, special education teacher, regular education teacher, a parent, and the student when appropriate. And, this is interesting, an individual who can interpret the instructional implications or evaluation results. Somebody that can interpret is that fancy word, and sometimes, for the most part, it can be you, the special education teacher, can interpret the instructional implications evaluations. Now, here's what I did. If it was a first time, or certainly a 3-year re-eval, I asked the school psychologist to come. And often he or she were on rounds, on rotations, and so I would set the meeting when they could be there. You will not have much control over this when they're available. But it's kind of nice the first time that you meet with these families to tell them that their son or daughter is qualifying for special ed or not qualifying, to have the psychologist there. Representative of the school, regular teacher, special education teacher, a parent, student if appropriate, somebody to interpret the results of the skills. And then others at the discretion of the parent or school. Of the parent or school. So 6, I'm saying 7, but you can call it 6, are the ones. And who would that be at the discretion of the parent or the school? Who would the parent or school want there? Now, parents like to bring grandma or grandpa or somebody, especially if they're coming by themselves. I had them bring many a times. One time a mom brought her sister because she was so nervous. I saw one time when they brought grandma. If you work with Native American families, often you're working with grandmother, who is the guardian. I will tell you this, more than once I had the parent invite and bring South Dakota Advocacy or Parent Connection. In other words, some advocate for the student. And you really have no control over that. And that's often where that happened, is where they were dissatisfied. And so they would say, gee, I have this person coming. Who would the school want to invite? Well, here was my thing. If the student had a personal EA with them because of their disability, I invited that person. Sometimes they would come, sometimes not. Some of our nice, committed ones came. The ones that didn't, that said, I'm only paid till the end of the school day, and that is when I leave. I often invited, with the parent's permission, any probation officer or court service worker that the student was involved with, or anybody like that, social services, any outside agency. If the family and the child was involved, I invited them because often they had relevant input, and it was kind of a show of solidarity with the school. But that list can be quite long. It could be the speech therapist, occupational therapists. I had one time, get this, I was at one of the bus driver. It was his best friend in the school. He asked the bus driver if the bus driver could come. But it could be any of the therapists, can be anybody like that at the discretion of a parent or school. And so here's your 7 things. And in a nice abbreviated version, you are going to take these to your wiki on who are the participants in the IEP meeting. Do that now. Pause this and then come back. Okay, let's look at parental participation, specific steps. You notify the parents early enough, and you schedule that meeting at a mutual agreed upon time. And then you, if neither the parent can attend, use other methods, phone calls, home visits. I did many of those. I think we have technology now, like with our Illuminate and that, where you could hold it electronically. My thing was, in a low-income school, I worked with a lot of families that didn't have phones. I know it's kind of hard to believe, but they didn't have phones, so that was not unusual. And I would, the years I did it, at least a half a dozen times, I drove to parents' homes when I could not contact them and had the IEP meetings at their homes. I'm not sure I'd advise that now, but at the time it seemed like the thing to do. Okay. And here's the other thing I did. If I ever went on a home visit to do IEP, I made sure to take someone else along. Am I scaring you? Don't mean to. But that's one of the possibilities. Meetings held without a parent attendance. You have to document the attempts to involve the parents. Let me show you where I'd put that. An electronic version, it's a little bit different. But on the paper one, here's where we used to write them. Right here is on this top page when we talk about the dates and stuff. We would list out here the number of times and ways that we tried to get parents to come. Now again, just know that the first IEP, to initially certify them as a special education student, you have to have the parent's signature. After that, for the annual review, if you make adequate attempts and you can't seem to get them to come in, then you can implement the IEP by itself. Okay, then you provide a copy of that IEP to the student upon request, or to the parent. And I would think that parents would want a copy of that. You would print it off an electronic thing, okay? Because they need to sign it. When you're done with your IEP meeting, here are the folks that are on that invitation list that you've invited, that represent that general teacher, the SPED teacher, any therapist, and then you write the titles and who else is there, and they all sign it here and date it. So you're going to need this document, and then I would offer that to parents. Now, they don't always need to take it or have access to it, but as it says, reauthorization, you have to provide a copy at their request if they want that. And I would make that part of my routine, is that you get all those signatures, you make a copy. A nice portion here on computer generated. Create new ones. Monitor procedural safeguards from there. In other words, you check off. And I can't get access to that. I'm sorry. I've talked to the state a number of times about setting up some kind of a what we call sandbox thing where university folks can play with it, but obviously that's not their system. They purchased that online system that the state uses, but they do trainings on it and stuff that we can hopefully attend in the future. But it's so easy to do. It's so much easier to handle. And now the thing is, student moves from school to school, their IEP in the system can go with them. But it's so much easier to update records and monitor these things. Okay. So that's what a computer-generated IEPs do. And I say, and the state of South Dakota has a system and uses it. But the parts are still match identically the paper one. So what are these educational services and related practices? Well, that least restrictive environment means that to the extent appropriate, students with disabilities should be educated with students without disabilities. And that's what we call, in my opinion, the company line from the federal government. The feds decide this. And so we try and figure out where it's best for them, and they can be with students without disabilities the best possible. So here's this continuum of services, 3 major categories. It's a general class, a special class, or a special school. Okay, so generally, all the kids on IEPs are going to fit one of these categories, 3 categories, right? If you know anything about special ed, you know this to be true. And that is a little bit old. From 0405 said the percentage of students with learning disabilities ages 6 to 21 served in various educational environments, which are as follows. And again, this came out of SPED 100. You saw this, but here it is again. 52% in the general education classroom for most of the day. I mean, most of the day. It may come out a little bit for the most part. And so 35 in the separate rooms for 21 to 60% of the day. Then this for separate classrooms. And then only 1% of the kids with learning disabilities are in separate environments, meaning they're out of here in a different school. Because generally, somebody with learning disabilities we would consider to have a mild disability. And we're not talking about preschool kids, we're talking about school-age kids. And so, for the most part, they are in the general classroom or out for a very short period of the day, very important time of the day, small parts of the day. So that's about 87% or more. And who does this include? Well, sometimes if they have some behavior problems, that's where I found you tend to have separate classrooms in their school, is if it's behavior issues. And then this group also represents some with other problems. They're considered having a learning disability, but for some reason, sometimes it's behavioral, they need to be off-site in another place. So what is this continuum? And this is a buzzword. This is the word that you want to know if you want to impress in a job interview and stuff. What is a continuum of educational placements for students with disabilities? Continuum meaning all the different possibilities. A continuum looks like this, straight out of your textbook. And it walks you through those things. Now, here's that a little bit what we talked about, this school services, special class services. This, I'm going to simplify this for you. Here's what I want you to know about this continuum. Could you just practice saying that word a little bit to yourself now? Because I want you to speak eloquently about special ed, and that is, one is the continuum of education placements for students with disabilities. All right. So here's where I want to go to show you the most popular continuum in our systems, local systems. And it is this continuum right here. This is the continuum. So here is what number are we on? This is going to your wiki site, and you'll manage it well, about the continuum of alternative placements. And you're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. General classroom with modifications, resource rooms, self-contained classroom, separate day school, residential facility, home hospital. That is the continuum of placements. Remember we just said about 85% fit into one of these two, about 52% here and 35% here, and then it goes way down from there. Here's about 15% here, and then this separate day school means a different environment, and these are somewhat self-explanatory. Now before you go, don't go. Here's why we have this. Because if a child in your school district is found to have a disability that needs some kind of service, you have obligations delegated by the federal government that you must offer a continuum. Now, why would you need this? Let's say we are Madison, South Dakota. What does this matter here? Okay, what does this matter? Well, if I'm in Madison, South Dakota, my school, I can probably provide the general classroom with modifications. I can provide, obviously, the resource room. I can generally provide a self-contained classroom. But I may have difficulty providing these three here. How do I provide this? If I have a child that comes who has severe needs and I cannot serve them in one of these three that I have at Madison Central School, what do I do? How do I provide a separate day school or residential facility or home hospital? Do I start up those programs? Generally what schools do in that case is they buy that service from someplace else. In other words, they have to pay the piper, but they buy those services. So schools try and provide as much service as they can. Now, Sioux Falls school districts try and provide almost every one of those facilities, those continuum of placements themselves because of the number of students they have. But go now and create on your wiki the continuum of services, of alternative placement, continuum of placements in special education, we'll call them, and put those, and then come back. Okay, you're back. The least restrictive environment, the general education classroom, special materials and consultations, itinerant services, resource room assistance. These are the things that happen in the general education classroom. This is the kind of ways you can provide service in there. Even if the resource assistance, meaning they need a little assistance from the resource room to help them be successful in the general education classroom. Again, we're on the continuum of placements. And then RTI. You know about RTI? Return to intervention. Reintegration of students with this. Okay, evaluate each student's needs. Ensure that this instruction is based on scientific research. Ensure evidence-based research like the RTI model. And consider social consequences. And that's a big one. Kids that are struggling with disabilities, don't have friends. What happens if we place some either in or out of it? And then sometimes you have to very overtly teach essential social skills. And what I mean overtly is that I didn't have to teach as many overt skills to my boys because they would pick it up from seeing others. They could observe it. When you have to overtly teach social skills is you have to stop students and say, this is how we meet people. This is how we make friends. Let's practice. One of the things that I observed, and it happens to a lot of students, but especially the students I worked with, they couldn't keep their mouths shut. And what I found is often teaching social skills didn't help them with that, but I tried to give them some tools of what to do in certain circumstances. So that's, if you got to reintegrate them, and often this term, reintegration of students, means back into regular classes. Reintegration. And that's a process. So from mainstream to school, the rationale for this regular education initiative, and you have a rationale for inclusion and for continuum of placements. Remember, you have the continuum now on your wiki. And then research, movement from mainstreaming to inclusion. Let me do this. Let me go have a look at the textbook and see their findings on this. They're just talking about the services that you would have. You're available to. Here's this reintegration of students that we're just talking about. It talks about this reintegration. And I want you to study this a little bit. And here's one I want you to be aware of. In fact, let's make this the next thing that you bring to your wiki. And I find this very important, especially if you work with older kids. Elnet, 1983, surveyed secondary teachers to determine student skills and behaviors that were considered necessary for success in general education classroom. She developed the following rank ordering of student competencies important to success in the secondary classroom. In other words, from most important to least. So the number one thing that secondary teachers felt students need to be in the regular classroom were to follow directions in class. Now it's interesting that we'd have to say that, but as a recovering special ed teacher from middle school, I would agree. I don't know what it was, but they could never, you had to re-explain it 10 times. They just couldn't pick up on what was going on, and I thought most of the time they weren't paying attention. But, they come to class prepared with materials. Another huge deal. No pencil, nothing to write with. This, but look at these 14 things and take them to your wiki and make a little heading for yourself that these are the necessary skills to be in the regular classroom. These 14 things are the necessary skills to be in the regular classroom. Go do that now. Pause this and go make a little thing in your wiki about skills to be in the regular classroom. Okay, you've come back. And now this goes us into that movement from mainstreaming to inclusion. Okay, the regular education initiative that we we're just talking about. Some students with learning or behavioral problems who need special services do not qualify for special education services. Ah! Then what? We don't talk enough about that. Students are stigmatized when placed in special ed settings that separate them from their non-disabled, normally achieving classmates. And special ed students usually are identified after they develop serious learning problems. Therefore, the emphasis is on failure, and that's always been a big thing. Is it's a failure model. You have to fail before you can get the service. In special ed systems, what is eligibility requirements and rigid rules may not lead to cooperative school-parent relationships. Yeah, it is rigid. It's very rigid. Okay, so that's what this REI, this Regular Education Initiative, was. Rationale for the REI. Okay, and this inclusion movement. Inclusion position. Please read this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but there's some questions on the test over it. Here's the rationale for inclusion. It's interesting. Many inclusionists believe that placing students in integrated or inclusive settings is morally right. Okay, and what's interesting about that again is the federal government is endorsing this, and it's very interesting that we use the word morally when we talk about that. Morally right. I find that a very interesting term to put in a textbook about placement of students. Okay, both identification and consequence labelings. I'm not going to read all that to you. Read this about labeling, because I say I know on the test there's questions about labeling. And here's some rationale for that continuum. And you know that word now because you're very good with that. General education class placements and the continuum of placements apart from general ed are necessary to meet the intense and diverse needs of special students with disabilities. In the history of SPED documents the enormous efforts of parents, legislators, educators have done to make this happen. All right. And here, this is the part on research of that inclusion. I'm going to let you read that. The efficacy of inclusion. Very interesting stuff. This will be all yours to read. Okay. Program factors. So what are those things that we just talked about? Here they are. Successful inclusion and successful academic achievement of students with mild disabilities. Teachers teaching teachers. Okay. In different ways, and I know a number of schools are starting to use these models to get better equipped teachers to work with kids that have disabilities. How do you find time to do it? What does it look like? Whatever. Assistance teams, coaching, what's peer collaboration, what's cooperative teaching, communication skills, those kinds of things. Special education or at-risk teacher. First of all, collaboration. How do we work together has got to be a big thing. And then parent-teacher collaborations, like how do you establish that? You have to have culturally responsive relationships in these conferences, and then parents as teachers teaching other parents on working with kids with disabilities. So this we talk about in another class, but students with these learning problems are more successful when parents and teachers work collaboratively. When parents are involved with their child's education at school, the home becomes the supportive foundation that student needs to face daily challenges. This is from this researcher here that wrote this book. But here's the thing. Based on what we told you at the beginning, if parents have low academic skills, this relationship is hard, and this relationship with the student is hard. And so just be aware of that. You'll work hard to collaborate with parents, but just know that that will not absolve you from your responsibility to the child, because sometimes the parent is emotionally and academically overwhelmed to work with the child. What are these variables? Well, you got to focus on time for learning, high rates of student success. Okay? In other words, you give them things at the level that they can be successful with. Positive, supportive learning environments, that's you. Plan and maintain a motivational environment. We talked about at the beginning, that's you. Okay, and this was in the front of the text on Guinot, and he is very found to be an expert in the area, especially of working with troubled kids. Need to recreate caring environments. I have come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the classroom. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather for them. As a teacher, I possess tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a child humanized or dehumanized. Now, folks, I am a parent, and I find I have that same role. But in a special education classroom, this will be more true than any place else. In any classroom, it is absolutely certain, but in a regular classroom, or a special classroom, more. Can I ask you to take this one last thing to some prominent place on your wiki from Dr. Guinot, and make sure you credit him from this text, because it comes right from page 3 of your textbook, but display this in some prominent place on your wiki. Okay, go do that now, and then come back. You're back, and I want to give you a quick flyover now of what the test is going to look like over Chapter 1. We'll spend quite a bit of time yet studying the IEP, but the test will come available on D2L, and I just want you to give you a flyover so you know that you're going to have to do some investigation into the textbook other than what we've discussed here today. For example, here's question 1. These will all be objectives. There'll be choices for each one. I've removed the choices so you can just see the question. 2004 reauthorization. A new regulation allows students who are not identified as requiring special ed services yet need support to be successful in the general ed classroom to be eligible for what? And it has one category here that they can still be eligible for, and it's only for young children. You need to find that out. The specific components of the IEP, they are on your wiki at this point. So you should be able to identify those. Age is guaranteed by what? Through the age 21 is guaranteed by the what? Okay. Here, this is on your wiki, what the IEP must state. We just talked about this. It's a plan for what? 94-1, the Individual Family Service Plan. I'll get carried away here. We had this on a chart. Okay, and I think it was 04, 05, but I think it's the same numbers. Percentage are very close. Okay, this you have to look up. What is a support service that a resource room teacher should provide to a general educator? We went through that in the textbook. And facilitate the integration of students who have disabilities with students without disabilities. Educators should teach what? And I talked very specifically what they should teach. This is a different question here about this ranking. This is different, this ranking. We talked about that too, but that's different. The rankings here. And so you have to go back. That too is on your wiki. You have to go look up Madeline Will. What system of service delivery was she for? Okay. What's that one up here? Students with disabilities need optional placements to learn as a manner commensurate with their potential is based for the what? Here, look at those rationales for inclusion. Okay. Problem-solving stages or of goal entries, problem identification. That's in the problem-solving thing. A team approach. There's quite a few questions on this teaming business, so you have to look that up. This here about initiator or facilitator engaged and stuff. What is this one? Two teachers share instructional responsibilities for a common body of content area. What kind of teaching is that? Like team teaching? Okay, this you have to look up the stage of the successful parent-teacher conferences. Like what kind of questions should they ask or stuff like that. Parent tutoring indicates what? The most primary findings of beginning teacher evaluation study. Look that up in your textbook. Beginning teacher evaluation study. Okay. Research suggests that the percentage of their time that students need to spend on tasks allow almost complete understanding of occasional. This gives you a choice of percentages of what percentage they need to spend on tasks that allow them for success. Then look up Sprick here. He's a big wheel in this too. Reports well-managed classrooms of high-achieving students. The teacher likely maintains attention to positive or negative elements at a ratio. It gives you ratios. Look up Spreck. He'll give you a ratio of what they consider important. Here's Lovett. Look up Lovett. You may want to write these down. Students' descriptions of good teacher reflect the importance of being. And then here's another one. You look this one up in on chapter 1. Internal motivators. Okay, so this is all of this lecture. There's some other parts going to be part of this lesson, but this is all of the lecture.